Robbie Kerr is a director of Adam Architecture, the leading practice specializing in classical and traditional architecture, as well as contextual urban design. So Robbie, I'm looking at your CV. You work for Foster's as well as Wizzy practices in the Far East. Have you always had an interest in traditional architecture, or did it grow on you?
I did come across Adam as my part 1 year out, and I actually fell in love with the culture before I fell in love with the traditional architecture. The traditional architecture has sort of come out of me as something which I actually realized completely happily doing, loving, finding new ways of exploring in a way that I never really found at university.
One of your fellow directors, George Samaras Smith, said that when he was training at Edinburgh, there was very little encouragement of his interest in the classical. And by the time you got to Edinburgh, had that changed?
No, I fear not. Edinburgh did very little to encourage any diversity of thought away from where they particularly wanted to go. I mean, it was, as all university experiences are, great for the creativity. The experience at Brooks under Matt Gaskin was probably a little bit better, but the unit I chose definitely didn't encourage traditional architecture. And I think it's slightly sad that there's been a missed opportunity at universities not to at least teach the basics of classical architecture, and actually go further. I think the paucity of teaching and understanding of critical debate about classical architecture has meant that for the last sort of 70 years, we've missed a generation of being able to be creative with that language that is all around us. And yeah, I think it's frustrating. But what I do note is that amongst my peers, there is a growing interest in classical architecture. That might be just because it's the unknown, the slightly beguiling, like anyone, if there's a void in your knowledge and you're curious, you want to explore it. And that's quite exciting. So I'm hoping that things will change. And there are courses. Kingston have a good course that now specializes in classical architecture. So you can do it, but it's still very much not the mainstream. So hopefully it'll continue to improve.
The Adam Architecture website says that you're developing your own design ethos, and as well as an interpretation of the classical architecture principles. Can you talk about that? And aren't the principles of classical architecture immutable?
Yes. I mean, ultimately, classical architecture is a language. It's a set of rules. But like any of these great architects, and I fear putting myself even in the same sort of sentence, but I don't. But you look at the great pantheon of architects who have taken classical architecture and then invented and been creative, being humorous. As I say, I'm not comparing myself to Michelangelo or Lutyens, but great heroes, both of them might be. They took classical architecture and they've done something different with it at very different times, under very different circumstances, politics, economics. And I think, a bit like I touched on just briefly at the university, I think that there's something which I found post-university, which brings a great satisfaction, is using that skills that university taught of being critical and being creative and trying to think around the subject. To think, well, come on, this is a set of rules and languages, a set of letters. And that doesn't mean that every text that comes out of the publishing houses reads the same. It's very much like that. If you can understand the principles, then you can start to be more creative and you can start to bring in new influences that you have around you. And so for me, having grown up in Hong Kong, having spent a significant part of my life in Cuba, I find that challenge of taking those lessons, whether it's the environment, whether it's the politics, whether it's the changing social trends, it's a sustainability, it might be in hands, probably not my own, of parametrics, of different tools that are available to design, to start to sort of find new ways of using those rules, those immutable rules, to do something different and more interesting, and to tailor that to today's society. And so I suppose at the end of that, if I can achieve it, is to create something which quite clearly has all the bones of classical architecture and all the elegance and bits that everyone admires for it, but can be done with a new flavor. And that would be quite exciting, but it takes time now.
Tell me about some of the key projects you're working on that might show that flavor.
The work that I'm doing, as you said in the introduction, is quite broad. I mean, there's the there's the urbanist side of things, and there's the classical, there's the architectural side of things, and there's the restoration. I mean, on the opportunity to explore that, I've sadly just lost a competition in Hong Kong for 40 luxury apartments, a new build, which really gave me a chance to try and explore that. Competitions obviously are great and deeply depressing at the same time. I have an enlightened client in Benin City in Nigeria who's allowing me to try and merge some of the edu culture with the environmental impacts there and the principles of classical architecture, which is a really, really fun hybrid. And he's very much engaged in that. And also the craftsmanship that you find within Benin City, the Benin bronzes, of course, so well known to all of us. So those, I suppose, are two architectural projects that are allowing it. I'm working with Homes England and CWT Group in Nottingham on the urban planning. And although whilst not sort of on the strict classical architecture, that is proving an opportunity to explore the use of codes in a way which is taking the volume house builders, really the big six, and asking them to just continue to improve their design. So it's again using those rules and being objective in the way we're doing it. And it's gratifying to see that through a set of objective codes, we've been able to take people who historically have been given a pretty bad name, rightly or wrongly, for their designs, to nudge them into better designs. So that's quite exciting. And on the restoration, I've just been appointed on a house which is laden with some fairly fun history. People, the film industries, attempted murders, and the clients have got hold of that, and they're young and exciting, and they recognise the history and the patina that's developed, and they want to bring it forward into their own lives and for the next generation. So it's always quite a broad spectrum of work that's going on, and they're all quite good fun. I think that from a sustainability side of things, we are working with a young family about my age in Northampton on a house which is very much in the vernacular of the area. I don't think it's not been an opportunity to particularly express boldness of design, but I don't think every project needs that. But on this one, they are incredibly keen to see how far we can push the house off grid. So we've been looking at actually, all the usual technologies, but the one that's exciting me is looking at how we can use hydrogen technology as a backup generator at the moment, and that's been developing fast. And there's an interesting company in Canada that we're doing some initial research with. And so it's quite fun being able to layer quite progressive technologies with the principles of traditional design to, again, I suppose, in that aspiration of just taking tradition forward. If tradition doesn't evolve, then it ceases to be tradition, doesn't it?
It's where you mentioned Homes England. So how do you deliver affordable housing in a traditional format? With
great ease. I mean, it's the requirements of a registered provider is just another design input to like any good designer having to work to. Aesthetically, the houses we design on our master plans are largely tenure blind. I've just done a number of houses on phase 5 in the scheme that Hugh Pett is doing down in Cornwall, and there it is completely tenure blind. And the fun there, and to use an analogy for a sport I don't have any joy for, of golf, it's a bit like a round of golf. You can shoot over par on a number of houses and bring it in under on others, and you come in level. It's a bit like that with affordable housing. You can actually put some more money in the right places, but as long as over the whole phase you're making the numbers stack up, then really it shouldn't matter whether it's an affordable housing or higher end housing. It's just how you're clever with the purse strings of your client and the materials at your disposal.
The planning changes that were proposed by Robert Jenrick were very sympathetic to your type of work. Do you see that shift in attitude continuing under a new minister in the department?
And clearly, the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission was helpful, as you say, in our direction. I mean, it reflected the public desire for a particular type of architecture, not necessarily what the architects want, which always brings a wry smile to my face. But I think that to go to one of our earlier points on the education, if we could actually just get the diversity of education and the appreciation from the wider industry, not just architects, of what makes good architecture. And in the case of classical architecture, there are many examples of really, really bad classical architecture. If you could actually start to embrace the fact that by good training, people become more aware of what is good and what is bad. The same can be said for modern architecture or modernist architecture. And therefore, this whole thing of it supports our agenda or not goes out the window, and we can actually start to have a much more plural built environment, which has space for wonderful modernist architecture and exceptional traditional architecture, some which is high volume, some which is low volume. And therefore, sort of the question sort of fades out. Of course, we need political support to help begin the levelling up process of the architectural debate. But I hope that with better education and better breadth of conversation, and this is incredibly helpful for that we can start to look at a more plural architecture and find younger generations coming through and those with wonderful established reputations continuing to do their great work. So it's a distraction. Clearly it's helpful, but I hope we can move on together.
Yes, I think in recent years we have become more plural, and the style debates which happened after Prince Charles's intervention in the with the carbuncle on the face of an old friend speech, that style wars, which lasted for almost 20 years after that, has now seems to have disappeared. And I think we do have a more plural approach. I
do agree. I think, and it's something I reflect in my own generation. It's sort of a tiresome hangover rather than an important matter in our discussions. And I just think that by opening the eyes to people of the possibilities, there's some interesting collaborations that are possible out there. I would love to see the opportunity to collaborate with some of my peers who are doing some fantastic work in a very, very different end aesthetic.
Well, thank you very much for your comments and your insights, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you very much indeed.